Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Tom Woods Show. It's episode 2404 with our old friend Michael Rectenwald. There's so many things one could say about Michael Rectenwald. He's, as Scott Horton used to say about me, he seems to be the author of every book that's ever been written. But in particular, he about his background, I want you to know, he is formerly of NYU, and he has an interesting story there that we've covered on the show before, because he was, let's be honest, Michael, the kind of professor that, I can't stand, So, in terms of his ideas and stuff. But then it turned out he just wasn't quite out there enough for them, and he wound up actually more or less being driven out. And he went from being, frankly, a Marxist to being hardcore in our corner, read everything imaginable. It's very, very unusual for somebody this late in his career to make a transformation like that. But did he ever? And boy, he knows the other side, absolutely inside and out. And he did this, not knowing, is he going to have an income on the other side of this? What's his life going to look like if he abandons everything he's worked for and with up to that point in his life? But he went ahead and did it. And I've gotten to know him through the show. And he's created courses for my Liberty Classroom, for libertyclassroom.com, one of my websites. So I feel like I've gotten to know him more or less as a friend, and I'm glad to welcome you back, Michael. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.
For some reason, I remember it might have been in 2020, Ron Paul had an event, and it was 2020. It was November 2020. And so I think this was the one where you were there too.
Yes.
And the night before, there was a dinner at his house, and I wanted to talk to you. But as soon as the dinner was over, you were gone. And I remember making a joke at the event that, I'm not sure you can ever fully take the Marxism out of the man, because here he was, that he was there for the free food and then couldn't find him. Anyway, so let's start with it. Even though we've done some stuff a little bit about your academic career and what happened to you at NYU, I want to go back a little ways. Obviously, we have plenty to talk about in terms of what's going on current events wise and today's climate and all that. But I want to start off with some material about your background, because your whole life is interesting. But first of all, I don't even know where you're originally from or what your family life was like or anything like that. So fill me in.
Yeah, I grew up on the upper north side of Pittsburgh, and it was a very decent but very working class background. So my father was in home remodeling, actually, and I come from a large German-American family. We had I have 8 siblings, 9 children altogether in the family, and I was 7th out of 9. And I was a little bit of a black sheep in my family, frankly, largely because I was an intellectual, actually. And so I've talked about this in Springtime for Snowflakes. There's like 2 obstacles that face one in such a background. One is the family itself, that doesn't quite get you. And then there's, of course, the external world, which, effectively tries to bar you from, or makes the hurdle to get to become like an academic or something like that is pretty high, coming from that kind of background. But I was, as I said, the 7th of 9. In high school, I actually went away to a Catholic seminary for 2 years, and I lived effectively next to a monastery. We joined to a Capuchin monastery and spent 2 years in the seminary, then left there and went and graduated from North Catholic High School. And I was the cameraman for the football team. And my father, of course, wanted me to play football, but I didn't want to. I was a tennis player by this point. And so interestingly, I went to undergrad for 2 years as a pre-med student, and I did very well. But halfway through that, I decided I didn't want to be a doctor. And interestingly, I actually went to Boulder, Colorado, to Naropa Institute, And I studied as an apprentice with the poet Allen Ginsberg when I was 20. So that was quite an exposure to left bohemianism, if you will, and to the world of letters, at least that segment of them. So it was that's very interesting. And then I finished my undergraduate degree at the University of Pittsburgh in English, and then I went into advertising for 9 years. I was an ad salesman, and I worked in radio stations, real grunt jobs at radio stations until I found a job at a network, radio and television network, and sold advertising for them. And I felt burned out by that career by 8 or 9 years. Went back to graduate school at Case Western Reserve University first for a master's in English, and then I continued on at Carnegie Mellon for a PhD in literary and cultural studies. And went on the job market and first landed a job at North Carolina Central University in Durham. It was HBCU, actually, a historically black university. And then I got a job at Duke, which was a neighboring school, but very different, if you will. And then finally at NYU, and you know the history from there.
All right, well, let me ask you this. Nobody's a Marxist and an ad man. They're like, you had to come to that later.
Yes. I can't do it in graduate school. You know, they started to feed us. You know, when I went back to grad school, as I've said in my book, Springtime for Snowflakes, there was a huge shift. All I wanted to do was become an English professor. I had been writing, and I published a book of poetry during the ad man years, and I wanted to go back and become an English professor, but I had no idea what had transpired in the universities, in particular in English and other humanities fields in the interim between my undergrad and graduate career. And that was that it had been invaded by what's called theory. And what they mean by that is Marxist, neo-Marxist, postmodern, feminist theory. And so everything was treated through those lenses. And they just kept feeding these books and texts to us. And there's really no coming up for air. And before you knew it, I was essentially having to choose like a leftist perspective, or else, there's no job for you. And so, Marxism made the most sense. And as you know, I mean, and I think Thomas Sowell has pointed this out, like for many people, especially in Europe, but even in the United States, it was deemed the only respectable intellectual position there was. And, that becomes very, if not explicitly stated, very implicitly stated through the university system and the academic world. And so, I mean, like, it appealed to me ethically. It appealed to me on other grounds. I had been in corporate America and I knew what it was like. And, I thought, maybe it was exploitative, maybe that people were being exploited at the point of production, and that, the whole profit system is a rigged game against the working class and all that. And having a working class background and some chips on my shoulder from that, it sort of played right into that, that sort of ethos that I had.
Well, again, I've covered with you the unfortunate episode at NYU that ultimately concluded with your departure there. Although you ended up wringing some concessions out of them, which was nice. But what was the moment, or what was the issue that was able to crack through the ideology that you had to make you say, maybe this isn't quite right? And was it there one thing and then that led to another thing and that led to another thing? Or did you just reject the whole system at once? Or what exactly happened?
Well, it started with, I guess, what I would call sort of social justice issues in the university and the hiring policies. And, it's really more than affirmative action. It's like, it's more than affirmative action. It's actually virtual, straight up discrimination against certain classes of people, especially straight white males. And I was on a hiring committee, and I was actually the chair of this committee at NYU. And I was objecting to the hiring of a particular candidate based strictly on identity and not credentials or ability, because they couldn't write a sentence, and they were being hired to be a teacher of professor of journalism, but couldn't write a coherent sentence. And that started it. And then, a lot of the trans issues that that were being foisted on me, essentially forcing me to deny my own senses, my own eyes and ears, and state outrageous things and claim them as true. That bothered me quite a bit. And I got some flack for some Facebook posts that I put up, and the hatred was just unbelievable when I posted an article about this student at, I think it was Michigan, who when asked for his pronouns, input His Majesty. And I posted that article. I thought it was hilarious. That caused an uproar, including my colleagues who were Facebook friends at the time. And then when in the fall of 2016, I was asked to put on my syllabus the phone number and email address for what was called a bias reporting hotline, I thought these people are authoritarians. They want us to turn the university into like a Stasi state where people are basically in a network of spies, spying on each other and reporting each other to the administration. And then I started anti-PC NYU Prof, the Twitter account, started tweeting criticisms of all this. And, the rest. I was contacted by a student newspaper reporter. And then the hatred and vitriol that came from this group, I effectively said, these people are so outrageously horrible people. And I don't care what their espoused ideology is. I want nothing to do with these people at all. And I renounced the whole left at once. And on political grounds, really, they were wannabe totalitarians, and I didn't want anything to do with them. And then I started the intellectual journey into libertarianism, and particular. So then I was basically a civil libertarian at this point. And shortly thereafter, after reading Mises and Rothbard and so on, and eventually Hoppe, I became an economic libertarian in short order. And I had to admit the errors of my ways. I have atoned, I think, for this by trying to be the best champion of liberty that I can be, and to be an anti-communist and anti-totalitarian, anti-fascist, all of that. Have written, I think, 5 books from this perspective now.
Were you socially, like, did you go out and see your colleagues socially before the blow up? Like, were you friends with them outside of the university?
Oh yeah, we would do things like readings at different clubs, and one of them was at some Marxist named club where I read short stories for this group. Colleagues would put on these readings, and I did these things, and we hung out at clubs, and I went to lunch and dinners with colleagues. I had a good deal of pretty many friends, and there were some people that were nasty to me even early on, largely because I was very ambitious, and I think that put people off. I was extremely ambitious about publishing, and I was extremely ambitious about bringing big conferences into the university through our department. And people, there's always this sort of petty resentment and jealousy type thing. I think that was part of it.
Well, so it's not just a professional relationship. You had friendships there.
Yeah.
And then this all happens. Where did you go for friends at that point?
That was tough. I had, it became national news. So I was getting all these emails from people and in support of me, from all over the place. And so that was very heartening. And then it started to become podcast news, if you will. And you're among those early podcasters that picked up my story and had me on. But there was a lot of others, and I started learning about other disaffected professors as well. I learned about Jordan Peterson, for example, and Gad Saad and others, and they became friends. I had a whole new group of people coming on to support me virtually and otherwise. I lost friends over this. I lost a great deal of friends, and I lost, as you said, I lost a sure sinecure, if you will. I mean, basically a guaranteed job with, I think, really light workload because, I taught 2 days a week for 9 months a year. That's it.
Yeah. Not too bad. Not too bad.
Right.
Hey, everybody, it's your old friend Woods here with a quick favor to ask. You may know I have a book coming out in the fairly near future called Diary of a Psychosis: How Public Health Disgraced Itself During COVID Mania. And unlike Anthony Fauci, I don't have mainstream media outlets eating out of the palm of my hand, but I do have a secret weapon, and that is all you good folks who, some sliver of you watch me on video, but most of you are listening in your car. And I could certainly use your help. When the book comes out, if you could help me spread the word about it, leave a review, anything like that would do me a tremendous favor. And I am even giving away goodies to people who are able to do this for me. I'm giving away an all-expenses-paid trip to Orlando for my big event next year. I'm giving away, of course, signed books, all kinds of great goodies. Check out tomwoods.com/street team, because that's what I call the group of folks who are going to give me a hand when the book comes out. I just need a little, maybe a share on social media, a review on Amazon or any of the major book platforms. Anything like that would be tremendously helpful for me. And I figure there's no harm in asking. But as I say, I'm even giving away goodies. And unlike most giveaways, where there are 800 billion entrants, you actually have a reasonable chance of winning one of the prizes. So get all the details at tomwoods.com/street team, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. How did you know, and this is the last question I'll ask on this line, then we'll get into other topics, but how did you know what to read next? I mean, some people who say, well, maybe I ought to look into libertarian literature, might have started with material less hardcore than what you went for. So was anybody guiding you?
Yeah, I mean, people were giving me advice and saying, you got to read this, you got to read that. And, Mises was brought up early, and I don't like, I want to read the really difficult, but, not for the sake of difficulty, but the real, how shall I put it, rigorous takedowns of socialism and at the root, which I was looking for, getting at the root of the matter. And that was really where Mises came in, as he gets to the root of it and routes it out from there. And that's what I needed. I couldn't bear with just like some pablum about, some sort of Milton Friedman type, denunciation of market interference. I wanted to know what was wrong with these things and why I should reject them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the themes. You just wrote an article on the two nations, and that article appeared in. No, I used to have it right here. Actually, it's in the car. I was going to read it over lunch. This month's issue. I read your article, but it's in Chronicles magazine, which is where my very first article was published 30 years ago, and I think still probably most people listening have never heard of Chronicles magazine, which is an outrageous injustice, but we'll rectify it here. What are these two nations?
Well, I think there's two forces, and likewise trying to establish two different kinds of nations. And it's not Trump versus, the left. I think it's more apt to put it in terms of globalism versus localism. That, the people that are running the state, especially at present, are globalists. And what does that mean? Well, globalism, as I see it, is a simultaneous expansion of the state's reach and penetration, and at the same time, the erosion of the nation state as such, its sovereignty and and constitution and the rights of its citizens in the process to impose a kind of global order. And I think that's what we're dealing with. So localism versus globalism, that's the two nations. It's not Trump nation versus Biden nation or something like that. I think it's the more fundamental dichotomy here, or opposition, is globalism versus localism.
Well, what's an example of that?
Well, we could see the globalist policies being driven home through various means. You might look at and this is a thorny topic, but I can tackle the immigration, the unfettered immigration in the United States, which is being promoted through open borders and the prospect of social welfare. And you also see it in the climate change legislation. It's not really legislation. It's actually executive orders coming through the Biden administration. The attempt to impose these climate dicta on us. And I think at the same time, we're looking at, one of the other things is like the libertarians have always talked about over-policing, but I think we're in a different condition right now. And I think, speaking of Chronicles magazine, Sam Francis put it best when he called it anarcho-tyranny. And that is the kind of simultaneous crackdown on the other, what we call law-abiding, decent people trying to live their lives, make a living, raise their families, taxing them to death, regulating them to death, and then terrorizing them in effect with lawlessness, and then criminalizing self-protection. I think that's part of it too. So there's this kind of sense that we don't have any protection either from our Constitution or from so-called police, or even from the judicial system.
I agree with you completely in terms of what the real dichotomy is here. It does seem, though, that the trouble is people are so divided in whether they're for Trump or they're not for Trump, or whether they're Democrat or Republican. I mean, probably back in 2012, whether you were for Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, is hardly grounds for strangling each other, But now the divide has widened to a quite significant degree. So it does seem like the prospects for people cooperating with each other across party lines and saying, here's a local issue where we don't want the federal government getting involved, or they don't understand how we live, or something like that. It just seems more remote because people's first instinct is to ask, are you for Trump or are you against him? And then you can't even have a conversation. Yeah,
and I think so. Yeah, I think that this localism would be people that agree for the most part. They don't need to form some sort of unity with people that are accepting globalist premises and conclusions and policies and plans. They don't need to agree with these people. The idea is that to break off from this whole thing is a kind of, in the spirit of secession, if not literal secession, a spirit of secession in which people, who agree with each other, like in local communities. And this is happening, New Hampshire and Iowa and Washington State and other places like that. They're forming kind of communities. They're even eschewing national politics altogether.
If only we could have more of that. Now, by the way, as I was making that point, I was thinking about the possibility that the candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might indicate the possibility that there may be some Americans who are willing to say, look, the elites have failed us no matter which allegiance we have, pro or anti-Trump or any of that other stuff. The elites have failed us inside and outside of government, and we need to be willing to talk to each other as human beings, leave these parochialisms aside, and see if, as people of goodwill, we can manage to live together in peace. I think that's been the message of RFK. And then what happened was the other day, this attack in Gaza.
Right.
And then every politician felt the need to indicate, or American politician, that the American special relationship with Israel, of course, will continue, and we'll send them everything they need, and this, that, and the other thing. And RFK issued a statement exactly like everybody else's. It could have been written by George W. Bush, sounded exactly like everybody else's. And if you look in the comments are just dominated by people who saying, we thought you were a maverick, that you wouldn't necessarily just mindlessly go along with everybody on something like this. And that's it. I'm repudiating my support. Now, I don't know. I mean, and as well as I do, Twitter's not real life. But
yeah, right.
I still feel like that's something.
Yeah, I think so. I think, there's a lot of things that I agree with him on, like Ukraine and the arming and funding of Ukraine and how that's exacerbating and escalating and prolonging that conflict. And his COVID policies were right on. I think his discussions of, or his treatment of, collusion between the state and corporations is right, at least in terms of the effects. I don't think he gets the causes right, but he's right about the effects of it, and the kind of attempt to dissociate these two entities is correct. And then he comes out with this, but there were, other things that I couldn't agree with anyway, like his plan to have the federal government back 3% mortgages for people, basically expanding the state and distorting the market and increasing the debt and so forth. I just thought that was just pure welfare statism. But then he comes out with this, and I think he just basically threw his hat right back into the establishment altogether. And it's shocking, really. I thought that he would have at least a more nuanced stand, but his position was even more stringent or strenuous than some others. Like he said, they're going to be in a prolonged war, and the United States needs to support this war in the long haul. I don't have the exact words in front of me, but the implication was, arms and funds should go to Israel to aid our ally against these terrorists. And now I do think these are terrorists, and I do think Israel was assaulted, but I don't think that position is viable. And I think it's also just straight up establishment politics.
I personally I think this is going to make life a bit more difficult. I mean, maybe it's a moot point anyway, because Trump seems to be running away with the Republican nomination. But I think it becomes slightly harder to be Vivek Ramaswamy right now, because he was at least partially trying to be America first, and they were ribbing him a little bit because he had a somewhat nuanced view on Israel. Right. I haven't followed up to see what his opinion is at the moment, but how are you going to have a nuanced opinion on this right now? So you either just have to go all in, or you have to say there are a lot of tragedies around the world, and we cannot possibly be involved in them all. And in trying to be involved in them all, we have made for ourselves enemies that we did not have before, and we would not have had. We have squandered goodwill around the world by doing things like this. So we wish everybody on earth the best. But since I believe in America first, you remember that's our slogan. Remember that. That's our slogan. The thing that comes first is my country, and not getting it dragged into another conflict, as it could very easily do. But, is there a constituency among the Republican base for that, when so many of them believe in the rapture and all this eschatological stuff from the 1830s? And I'll just say, Michael, I mean, I don't want to alienate my Protestant followers, but I will say Luther didn't believe in any of that rapture stuff, and Calvin didn't think that it was an obligation of the world, the Christian world, to help bring about a state of Israel to usher in the end times. I mean, this is not on the table. This is a complete novelty theologically, but unfortunately, because most Protestants, I think, undervalue tradition, it shouldn't strictly bother them that this is a novelty from the 1830s. Maybe it took 1,830 years to figure this out. So that's not particularly helping. So I don't know what you do when that's the base you're trying to appeal to, and you're dealing with people who think that they're helping to bring in the end of this great story by having this all happen. And well, anyway, I could get sidetracked on this theological stuff all day.
And that's okay.
But I don't know how you do that.
Studied it.
I don't know. You know, like is there a constituency for that in the Republican Party? I like they're like, just when you think they've become more critical thinkers and they won't just get swept up in what the television tells them, and they'll have independent opinions, then Israel has an attack like this, and it's right back to herd mentality. Now, one of them can think in a way that, well, yes, this is a terrible, terrible thing that's happened, but there are all kinds of terrible things that have happened. And you can't do this forever for a million reasons. You cannot do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how there was this, it looked hopeful, I think. Yeah. There was this new anti-war right, especially with reference to Ukraine. And then, earlier than that with reference to the Iraq War. But this is like a past tense political anti-war right, apparently, because they don't have any principles with reference to this. Their positions with reference to Ukraine and Israel are distinct, and they don't see a contradiction there. I do. Well, they say, well, this is different. That's always the refrain. This is different. This is different. This time, it's real war, and this time we need to do it, and it's a holy war, in effect. That's a interesting development that now the anti-war right, has basically abdicated entirely now because of Israel. So this is, it's kind of deflating, actually.
Hey, everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Monetary Metals. This is a company I've been using for a year or two, and it's fantastic. Now, if you're like me, you probably own some gold. But also, if you're like me, wherever you have that gold stored, it's probably just sitting there, not really doing much for you. If anything, it might be racking up storage fees so that over time you wind up with less rather than more. But what if you could put that gold to work for you? I mean, what if you could get it to do something for you? And that's exactly what Monetary Metals is all about. You can grow your gold year after year with Monetary Metals, which offers interest on gold paid in more ounces of physical gold. You can earn 2 to 5% on gold and silver in their leasing program, which supports qualified gold-using businesses. And if you're an accredited investor, you can earn higher returns, think double digits, in their gold bond offerings. All the interest is paid in physical ounces of gold, so your total ounces grow and compound year after year. So over a 10-year period, for example, 2.5% annual, 100 ounces becomes 128. At 3%, 100 ounces becomes 134. At 4%, 100 ounces becomes 148. You get the idea. They've been at this for 7 years. Jeff Deist, formerly of the Mises Institute, recently joined forces with them. Their vice president of relationships, Addison Quayle, has been at my house. He's been a friend of the Tom Woods Show. I've seen him at conferences all over the place. These are our people, and they're doing something really, really creative and important. So start saving and earning in gold. Go to monetary-metals.com/woods to learn more about how to get started with your account. Don't forget the hyphen. That's monetary-metals.com/woods. Yeah, and it's like I forget, it might have been Michael Malice who said, I can't remember now who said it, that now with Israel, the right has its Ukraine. It has its thing that it's going to pour money into and all that. So, and I might say parenthetically that, again, I bear no ill will to anybody in the world. But the question is, our country's tapped out. So
totally,
it's not going to help anybody in the world for the U.S. to go bankrupt. Actually, it might. It might help some countries in the world not to get bombed anymore if the U.S. went bankrupt. So I'll take that back. But the claim about Israel being a great ally of the U.S., you can't question that, or that means you, quote, hate Jews. Now, if I don't like the policy of the Armenian government, that doesn't mean I hate Armenians. What kind of a psycho would you have to be to draw that conclusion from that statement? But the people who say things like this don't actually believe them. They're just trying to ruin your
It's
good
rhetoric.
name.
It's
But in terms of Israel being a great ally of the U.S., I don't understand. What has it done for us? I know what we've done for them, but what has it done for us other than attract enemies that we did not have before? The United States did not have this level of animosity in the Arab world before the special relationship. Even into the 1960s, did not have this level of animosity. So maybe we get something in return that's even better than that is bad. But if we have gotten it, I just don't see what it is.
Yeah, I don't see what it is either. And they've been the beneficiaries of our actions, though, quite a bit. Not only in $3.8 billion worth of aid every year, military aid. I think they were the beneficiaries of the Iraqi war. We certainly weren't. So what's in it for us is a very good question.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that'll shock and horrify some people watching, but I got to be me, right? Got to be me.
Yeah, me too.
If you want people to be sound on a lot of things and then suddenly become completely conformist when it comes to this issue, you can go read Breitbart or the Daily Wire or something like that. But that's not what you get here. So I just talked to Keith Knight. I think you know him. To talk.
Yes.
We were talking about Thomas Sowell's latest book. Thomas Sowell apparently is 93, and he just released another book.
It's amazing.
The guy has earned some rest, and yet he refuses to take it. But So we talked about a lot of specifics in that episode. It was just relentless statistics, and they say this, but this is the truth, and they say this about this racial group and this about that one. But you've looked at this subject also from a bigger picture perspective as somebody who knows some of the underlying ideas that gave rise to the social justice movement. Like so-called postmodernism and stuff like that. I think words like postmodernism are just words to most Americans. Like even people like conservatives and libertarians who know that they should be wary of things like this. If you were to quiz them, they wouldn't really know exactly what any of these terms mean. But you do, Michael Rectenwald.
Yeah, unfortunately, I guess. Yeah. So, that's a great book. I've been reading it. The Fallacies of Social Justice is the latest Thomas Sowell book.
Yeah, Social Justice Fallacies.
Social Justice Fallacies. Yeah. Yes, that's right. And he's right about everything. But I was thinking some other things that are also true about this. One of them is like this radical egalitarianism, I think, is underneath this idea that men could become women and women men. This comes into play, brings into play also some postmodern themes and ideas that, truth is established by the individual, and there's a kind of epistemological solipsism really that reigns there. And so you can't beat the social justice warrior with arguments like, in a sense, you can't beat them with arguments like Sowell's, unfortunately, because what they'll say is that's their truth and my narrative is true. It doesn't matter what the statistics say. It doesn't matter what what the numbers are or what the facts are in terms of whether unequal outcomes or disparate outcomes, as they call them, are based on racism or not. There's my lived experience, and this really comes out of postmodern theory, the idea that there's no truth, that truth is relative to the subject, it's a subjectivism, and that there is no objective criteria that can contest my individual lived experience. I think it's like what Mises called polylogism in the extreme. That's what we're dealing with.
But if that's the case, if their view is that you can take your empirical data and shove it because I have my lived experience, then I know people overuse the word literally, but in this case, it's absolutely accurate. There is literally no point in arguing because you can't ever reach a conclusion or a consensus with them.
Yeah, there's no point in arguing with them in a way, except I think, showing them, in fact, what the rhetoric, what the arguments amount to, and effectively showing them that they're abdicating their ground at the same time as they're making their points. So, if there's no truth and your truth is totally subjective and relates only to your experience, then and nobody else can know this truth, so we're left in an epistemological nightmare, solipsism. And there's no way out of that. So what you're saying is there's no point in talking to you. And likewise, there's no point listening to you either.
Now, let's get on to some real current events that involve Michael Rectenwald himself. So you are running for the nomination for president of the United States under the Libertarian Party ticket.
Yeah.
You want to describe what that process has been? I've considered it myself over the years, and then thought that would just be a miserable process I would hate every minute of. I'm sorry to say. So tell me what is that actually like?
Well, it all started. Funny thing is, I had already written out like a prospectus for my next book the day before I got this phone call. So I was planning on something else for my future.
Yeah.
And then I got a phone call from somebody in the Mises caucus. That's the caucus that effectively took over the Libertarian Party over the course of the last year and 3/4 roughly. And they said, what do you think about running for president as a libertarian? I was like, are you sure you called the right number here? I mean, what makes you think that I would be a viable candidate? And, frankly, it wasn't because I don't think I have the qualifications. It's that I have never showed any interest in being a political candidate, particularly wasn't interested in being an employee of the state. And because I really have no special affection for the state as such. But they laid out this plan, and they laid out the reasons for this. And it really goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is what is the viable solution? And I've been fighting against these totalitarian globalists for some time, as you know. And this was a plan to actually put my money where my mouth was. And that is to actually do something about it. And so I took it on. And it's been an interesting ride already. I should say I could write a book about this at this point already, because there were some things that I didn't expect. I didn't expect, since this Mises caucus had taken over the party, I didn't expect the kind of divisiveness that still subsisted within the party, and some of the attacks that I would receive from other libertarians. It was pretty interesting, I should say. Now, I've been trying to stay out of this type of mudslinging altogether, but, at first, as you know, when you're trolled, it is very difficult to resist responding to these people, because the things they're saying, you don't want to let them stand because they are outrageous, right? So, as you're very well aware, it's tough not to bite. And I bit it first. And some of the things that were said, I don't know if you want to know about this, but
yeah, why not?
One of the things is that what we've talked about is, well, you were a Marxist, so why should a Marxist be why should Marxist be a libertarian candidate for president? And I tried to go over this. Listen, I'm not the first Marxist who's turned into an arch anti-communist. Thomas Sowell is one of them. He's another one.
Yeah.
Whittaker Chambers. And I'm sure you could mention probably a whole list, right? Of people that have been, staunchly Marxist and then came to their senses, and they become some of the strongest opponents to it. So that was one. There's others that are less distasteful, but the basic idea is there came a whole legion of trolls after me, and I tried to send them off, but then I effectively gave up, and I just started making my own statements.
I just find this so surprising. I mean, I feel like if you're reasonably well informed in the libertarian world, you should know who Michael Rectenwald is. I mean, and it shouldn't surprise you that, it might surprise you that he's a candidate, but you wouldn't say, well, that's wildly unexpected, or that's wildly inappropriate and I should be against it. You should know. If you don't know who Michael Rectenwald is, then that means you're not listening to any of the major podcasters. You're not,
right.
You're not on the Mises website. You're not with Ron Paul. You're not. So then what are you plugged into if you don't know who Michael Rectenwald is?
And this is another thing I think you'll relate to is people that have no skin in the game, and that haven't done anything. And I almost used a swear word there. They haven't done anything appreciable that I can see for liberty, or are calling you out for having, been, I think I've been fighting for liberty now for 7 straight years, very rigorously, with 5 books and numerous, dozens and dozens of essays and podcasts. And I mean, you're right. If you don't know who I am, then maybe you're uninformed. And I just find there's a difference between the Libertarian Party per se and the Libertarian movement as a whole.
Huge difference. Huge difference.
Yeah.
Because if you go to, any reasonable libertarian gathering or
Right.
me, we get huge cheers. Everybody wants to come see us. So I don't even know who these people, half the people in the LP even are. Although I will say that, I gave a breakfast talk there at the convention this past time, and that room was packed, and they deliberately tried to the bad guys tried to undermine me by having Edward Snowden being beamed in another room, because they couldn't. They tried to get me removed from the event, and then when they couldn't accomplish that, they put Snowden up against me, and I still sold out the room.
Wow.
I mean, so look, don't mess with Woods, okay? Woods has earned his place at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd never had this sort of treatment in the libertarian movement per se, like at Mises Institute events or other events with other cognate institutions and groups. Never had I encountered such treatment or, attempts to sort of derail and undermine and backbite and, the whole story, how this is. So that was surprising. And, I've had nothing but great treatment from libertarians per se, or, the broader libertarian movement, and nobody really has questioned the veracity of my conversion before.
Oh yeah, no question about that. I mean, that thought never occurred to me. Having known you and talked to you, I mean, if you're not truly converted, then you are the best actor in the history of the world. You deserve an Oscar. I mean, could you imagine fake converting to something and in the course of it writing 5 books on that thing and not hating every second of your life? Like, imagine as a libertarian having to write a pro-Marxism book and then doing that again and again.
Yeah. Or giving up a job at a cush job at a university for speaking the truth. Being run out of the whole left.
I mean, the easiest thing in the world for you would be to just continue to be what you were.
Exactly.
So,
but I couldn't do it because I had to tell the truth, and that's what my campaign is based on. I'll tell the truth about everything as I see it, and including myself. Everything about my history, and I'll explain it all to people who are acting and asking in good faith.
Well, what are you? No. Let's think about a guy like Trump. He had like 3 issues or 4 issues that he just hammered away at. Mm-hmm. But if you asked him about some other issue, he'd answer you. But he was talking about trade and the wall, stuff like that.
Right.
Do you have a few things that you would want to hammer away at, even though they're not the only things you believe in?
Yeah, that's true. That's good. Yeah, I mean, I think the most pressing issues right now, of course, are war again, right? So that's number one. Just in terms of the exigency of it, it's a very pressing, dangerous proposition that we're entering into, and that has to be opposed. And so I'm going to be consistent spokesperson about that. And then, of course, the localism or decentralization as it's the only movement I think that's capable of thwarting this centralized globalist enterprise that we're facing. And, I have the standard talking points that, I think that become almost virtue signaling at this point, like end the Fed. Of course, I want to end the Fed. I want private commercial banking with competitive currencies. And that would solve so many problems, but we're not going to get there right away. We need to first, I think, erode the power of the state by effectively seceding if not literally, but then at least spiritually, or I don't know how else to put it. Spiritually, I guess was a good word for it.
Well, that is where I am at this point. And because and yet, even I, Michael, even I, as jaded as I am, even I sometimes get caught up in, especially when I'm interacting with friends on Twitter. And I have a feeling that it just seems like there's so many people out there who support me. I think, well, maybe we could still go for the whole ball of wax after all.
Yeah.
But then you walk down to the shopping mall and you have a feeling that most people aren't following your Twitter feed, and maybe they would be horrified if they knew what your opinions on everything was. So we'll see. So do you have a website?
Yes. My campaign slogan is Wreck the Regime. That's REC, the regime, one word. So it's wrecktheregime.com. That's the the campaign website.
Did you come up with that?
Yes, I did.
Well, whoa, that's pretty good.
Yeah, Wreck the Regime.
Well, especially because you had that podcast. They have that podcast at the Mises Institute, Wrecked. Again, right. Building on your last name. You have a much cooler last name than I think you realized.
Yeah. Well, so the Mises, speaking of the Mises Institute podcast, it's suspended, but I plan on picking it up elsewhere for the time being and going back to it after the campaign. The Mises Institute, as you know, is a nonprofit that can't even give the appearance of supporting a candidate. So while I'll continue to write for the Mises Institute, and they're fine with me writing for them, but just having a podcast is a little bit too promotional looking to them.
Yeah.
So I understand that. So I've given that up too. That was income. That was pretty, decent income, frankly. So if anybody thinks I'm a grifter, it's quite the opposite. I'm actually a reverse grifter.
Yeah. Well, I wish you all the best. Wrecktheregime.com is the website. I'll link to it in the description of the video, and also at tomwoods.com/2404, which is our episode number and show notes page. So, Michael, best of luck to you. I didn't expect that when I first got to know you that this would be where life would take you, but life is full of surprises. That's what makes it so much fun. So, best of luck to you, and thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Tom.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.